super interesting. I mean, we've been talking for ages about these motherfuckers getting doxxed at some point and how everyone was going to lose their fucking minds. It's like any minute now.
Oh,
Have you
that's a
guys
nice
like
way to
gone
start.
LinkedIn trolling? Oh, fuck.
Good morning, everyone. This is Ryan. We're back with the delayed episode of the Three Body Problem. Let me start off by saying a happy belated birthday to Costin,
Hey,
who was
thank
part
you.
of our travel hiccup last week. Happy birthday, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Just back from Singapore. Had an amazing birthday, an amazing short vacation with the family. We did all the tourist things. Of course, we've been there before, but it was particularly awesome because we had the chance to catch up with friends. Just relax a bit, eat some too much food, plus 4
Good.
kilograms after the trip.
This is what you
Dude,
go
I
to
gained
Singapore
7
for.
pounds.
In
So
Singapore?
for the Europeans,
Yeah.
I gained 4. For the Americans, Juan gained 7 pounds. I don't know which one's worse.
Fantastic. At the top, Juanito, we came in with you mentioning the top story that I wanted us to touch is something we kind of predicted on this podcast that was going to happen, this kind of tit for tat. In the U.S., we've constantly become used to sanctions and arrest warrants and indictments against Chinese APT actors, complete with their face and photos and names and so on. We've become used to that over the years. And we've been talking about at some point it's going to be reciprocal and the Chinese are going to be starting to do this. And now we're starting to, just yesterday we got a news story Reuters covered very deeply with China accusing the United States NSA of launching advanced cyber attacks during the Asian Winter Games. Significantly here is the naming of 3 alleged NSA agents, Catherine A. Wilson, Robert J. Snelling, and Stephen W. Johnson. Juanito, you know these guys?
Of
No,
course,
we haven't hung out. We have not, they haven't come through. To be honest, like, okay, so I'm really curious about this, and I wonder if Costin's got some like magic to drop on this stuff. But like, okay, we've been expecting this to happen forever. And to be fair, we've been courting it. When I say we, I mean like not just the cybersecurity industry, but like the way that Gov has decided to go about like indictments and the way we've treated sort of the Chinese in the past, this notion of like name and shame. And you're like, yeah, what happens when they name and shame our Booz Allen contractors, right? So we've been waiting for this, and all I've kept saying is like, look, when they do this to us, if they do this to us, we're gonna lose our fucking minds. This is pretty tame, right? Like they didn't drop a camera shy threat connect camera shy style report where they show us like the running paths that these people take and pictures of their children and pictures of their families and that kind of like
It's
they
not a
held
stretch
back.
it's not a stretch that they have it either. I mean, like, why are we the only people capable of doing it?
Assuming that this is all legit, assuming that this is true, assuming that the research is right, assuming that they actually know who these people are on good reasons, because they also like mention these universities, they mention all these things, and you're like, okay, you're just, I'm not saying you're wrong, you're just not giving me the basis of your findings, would be. But assuming that's all true, they have to have it. And here's the other thing, right? Like, remember that they're not doing this the way we do it, right? Like, we tend to hold back to everything that is like technically provable or things that we can show on cyber reports, right? So you go like, there's all this OSINT, there's these connections, this is how we got here, and this is what we have access to.
So you'll see like a whole running documentation of it ahead of a U.S. action so that they can point back to a bunch of reports.
Or some coordination, right? Like this might still be like it comes from the FBI like and some other folks, but you have some way of like publicly substantiating it. Even in an indictment, you go, this is their handle, this is what the operation they did, this is like how we connected this, that, and the other. You're not getting that here as far as I saw. But also, I'm curious to what extent this is all just cyber sleuthing versus being all source, which is the difference that you get when you're not dealing with the U.S., right? Like the U.S. could be
what do you
putting
mean
out
all source?
I mean, like it's very different to have a product of just like a cyber investigation with some law enforcement tie-ins to it, as opposed to having human SIGINT, like having CIA, NSA, FBI, and everybody else go, here's everything we know from classified and declassified and unclassified, and like we're just gonna give you the whole fucking kitchen sink, because what matters to them is the investigation. It's not the bureaucracy and procedure of it, right? We've never had that in the States. Even the Mueller indictment, which was fairly revelatory, was largely built on like, here's these public, like, I'm sure that there were things, classified things that informed it, but it was mostly like, here's a bunch of private sector and publicly substantiated things to how it might be a parallel construction, but here's how we're substantiating it. It wasn't like, look, here's the full dossier of like what every agency in the US knows about these people, and here's a super complete picture. And what I'm getting at is like, with this thing, we may not even get an explanation of how they know, because the way they know could be they have a mole, they have somebody who's actually working in USIC, they have been spying on these people, they have taps in certain places, right? Like there's so many different ways in which you could be discussing this at an all source level. That's not necessarily the case. I think we've run into NSA operators in the past just out of like fuck ups, right? Like it happens, but not having, or for me, I don't know if I read deeply enough into this one, but not having seen sort of the logic that goes into it, I would also step back from the mirror fallacy and say, like, it is quite possible that what you're seeing here is an all source product, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's how people do intel in other places.
It's the first time we've seen China name APT operatives from the US, right? This is the first public doxing.
Apart from Rob Joyce.
Right.
He discovered Rob Joyce worked at TAO at some point. So, yeah.
Costin, what do you make of this? I mean, this is the University of California. Juan mentioned the universities. They also accused the University of California and Virginia Tech of being involved in the attacks. And I think there was some documentation. There was some separate documentation published. We've consistently talked on this podcast about like the emergence of Chinese reports documenting US activity. It's been kind of like a slow build up. And now we see this. Do you expect this, Costin, to become just a state of normalcy? It's the first time we're seeing it, but is this like the first of what will be normal moving forward?
Well, the first thing I'll say is that I remember, I think it was around 2012, around the time of all these Snowden disclosures, Obama was meeting with the Chinese president, and the director of the NSA was meeting with the Chinese equivalents, and we were kind of thinking like, what are they talking about? Do you remember?
I hack you, you hack me, but we hack for different reasons.
Exactly.
The Xi meeting with Obama in California was the big agenda item was cybersecurity, and when Obama was the big ask from Obama at the time was like,
and
cut out the economic espionage, right?
Well, yeah, and what I remember is that also around the same time, the U.S. was starting to drop all these indictments on Chinese operators, and everyone was cheering up like, "Yeah, nailed them!" Like naming and shaming, like a very important part of the policy. And I think there was only one guy who was, I think that he used to work for the NSA, was freaking out essentially, while everyone else was cheering. This guy, he was like, no, this is really bad, because like what stops them from doing the same to us? And everyone was like cheering, yeah. And well, this was kind of, I think, coming for a very long time. He knows who I'm talking about. It's one of his friends.
I think that was a lot of self-importance too. Like I don't think that's actually legitimately freak. If it's the one I'm thinking about, like part of this is like, you're kind of scared, but you kind of want everybody to know that you did some cool shit in your life, right?
Fair enough. You know. But there's I think one angle here that should worry everyone that works in offensive ops, which is that what happens if your names get pushed through Interpol, and then whenever you travel to a country which essentially works with Interpol, there's a chance that you will be stopped. There's a chance you'll be arrested. Of course, yeah. I mean. It'll be tricky. I wouldn't want to be in that position. Now, the other interesting thing here with this story, which I've noticed, is that I saw it dropping on the China Global News Network. I have the app on my phone, so they're spying on me probably through this app. But this way I get the news before all of you, basically in the United States. So I saw the news and I was like, whoa, 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 what's going on here? And then immediately, as I searched parts of this story on Google, I saw there were like 1,000 different Facebook stories, all apparently by different people, pushing the same narrative and the same story in Chinese.
This
And
story
this,
here, this story we're talking about?
the story we're
Interesting.
talking about in
So it's like there
Chinese
was a
again through
deliberate campaign.
Facebook. So there was a deliberate campaign with thousands of accounts pushing this story everywhere, that the Americans are spying on us, that they hacked our, well, attempted to hack into our winter Asian games in Harbin City. And like these are like the bad guys who did it. So I thought that this looks like a coordinated campaign. So there must be some kind of political agenda behind dropping all this information and trying to push it through social media as aggressive as they are doing. Now,
I think you're onto something, but go ahead.
What I think here is that first of all, like I did watch these games, by the way. Maybe not many people care about the games, but I did watch the opening ceremony. I don't think it was available to watch on YouTube in the United States. I think even I had to use some kind of VPNs to saw it live, and it's grandiose. It's huge. Like it's a huge demonstration
Olympic
of the
level?
power. It's like the richness and the cultures and the money that goes into there and the resource. It's absolutely insane. And I thought like this has to be perfect, right? If you want to convey the image of world power and that you know, you're on top of everything, you're better than everyone else, everything needs to be perfect. There cannot be any glitches, and there were no glitches, obviously. But yeah, of course, we remember the old days when Hades/Sandworm hacked into the Pyongyang Olympic Games, trying to sabotage them and exactly ruin this whole idea. So I think that for them, this was important. I don't know what went into there, but whatever they're trying to do, this is important, and it's part of a coordinated campaign to get a story. And I think everyone now pretty much beat on it. Like you see it on Reuters, you see the story is everywhere. So whatever they were trying to do, everybody felt and they just copied the story and published it everywhere.
Allow me to circle back a little bit to a point you made about landing on an Interpol wanted list. And we flagged it. And I want to ask about like you mentioned if I'm an offensive operator, I would be nervous. And I'm asking if you're a defensive APT researcher handling business logic software, or as our friends at Sophos says, implants, right? Are you in that murky gray area where one day there's a risk of your name landing in one of these things here? I mean, is that something that you guys get worried about when you're talking about your silence and your business logic software?
Costin's staring at me.
No, well, like you're the one who works for a vendor. You're the one with the EDR, and you're the one who's deploying the sound.
He's running implants.
I'm running the implants. Is that what you're saying? Or I believe they're called enhanced telemetry collection, right?
Am I just being conspiracy, Ryan, or is this too much of a stretch, or is there like a real risk?
It's not a stretch at all. If anything, it's kind of a given, right? Like 2015, ethics and perils, right? Like the paper's been out there. You and I discussed it on a podcast at the time, and at the time it seemed outlandish. But I also kind of want to temper this, right? Like I don't think that it's the telemetry bits that we need to worry about. There's a lot of things mixed in here, right? Like there's how much are you likely to get sort of like pulled into some of this stuff? B, there's the sort of the telemetry collection aspect of this, which I think has always been an opportunistic espionage enablement target, right? Like it's why you'd see GCHQ and some of these other folks like hitting sysadmins all the time because they have amazing access to a bunch of telemetry and like nobody watches the sysadmin's access. So if you want to do this sort of downstream stuff, like it makes sense that you would go for that access. And I think that you've got a similar situation with cybersecurity researchers and that kind of stuff where you go, hey, like we tend to have some pretty amazing, phenomenal access to a lot of things. And at that point, you get into a discussion of like how well engineered is your product for like just privacy stuff, right? Like this is a consideration that you have with EULAs and legal contracts whenever you're selling any kind of endpoint telemetry product, period, where you go, look, this company has to establish a relationship of trust with us. What can we see? What should we be able to see? What shouldn't we be able to see, right? Like it doesn't justify having complete access, right? So there's a certain amount that you're trying to engineer away, and there's some that you can't by virtue of what you're trying to do. And then there's the part of like getting in hot water with the government, and that is where you split that into what it means to get into hot water with an intelligence element of a government and a country in country, what it means to be an opportunistic target for enablement, and what it means to get into an Interpol red notice type list. And that's more of like a law enforcement and law enforcement adjacent action. And those are different things, right? Like they're all extremely different things. I think we are all enablement collection targets for a variety of intelligence agencies. Period, full stop. And we have been for 10 years now. So like get with the fucking program, accept your situation in life, figure out what your comfort level is and how you want to handle that and how much of that you can accept. Period. And frankly, if you were a gov operator for any of this, they know this. Those people are not traveling to China. They're not traveling to Macau. They're like, you've accepted to some extent that like you've done some shit. Those people probably know that you've done some shit because that's the name of the game. And like, you just live with certain constraints for the rest of your life. That's what made it so fucking ridiculous to hear from some of these NSA, like former NSA, former whatever operators who were like, oh my God, what if they name us? And it's like, well, bro, like you did the job. Like they surely talked to you about this. You're being a little ridiculous. But that's just what comes with having worked in intelligence, and you accept that your life is going to be a little bit off for the rest of it, right? Like you fucked with somebody and they feel that they have a right to fuck with you. On the Interpol side, the problem you get into is like red notices are actually prohibitive, right? Like at that point, you have a law enforcement problem in traveling. I don't think that's going to be a problem. Like, I just don't see us going in that direction. But the question here actually becomes, to what extent has our outsourcing of cyber operations to private contractors, Booz Allen, Raytheon, whomever, to whatever extent those people are kind of half in the middle of it, kind of executing, kind of not, put us in a similar situation to the reason we've been indicting all these Chinese folks, which is you're a part of a company that has been spun out, that has an MSS handler, but you're not really working for the government. You're not really working directly for the military in China. You're an entrepreneur, quote unquote, for a company in Guangdong that no one's ever heard of with 7 people that happens to hack a lot of shit in the US, and that take ends up with the Chinese government. And that's why it's been so easy for us to do those indictments, because you're like, we're not fucking with somebody who works for the PLA. We're fucking with somebody who owns a company, a private company in China, and is doing all this hacking on behalf of. So to what extent are we in the same situation, even though like you might say it's a prime, it's a gov contractor, there's authorities involved, but you know, that kind of nuance between us and the Chinese has never been super well spelled out.
Costin, you agree that it's inevitable?
Well, first I wanted to say that, of course, there's a lot of indictments of MSS officers, GRU officers, FSB officers. So there's like a lot of indictmenting on officers as well, in addition to all these private Chinese companies. What was, again, one of the things which was also interesting in these stories was the fact that they mentioned Huawei, the fact that these guys, besides the Harbin hacking, they also participated in cyber attacks on Huawei, and that should be super old stuff, right? That should be like 2010 level stuff, unless, of course, there's newer Huawei hacks of like this Huawei attacks they're mentioned in the Snowden documents as the NSA and friends were looking as better ways to backdoor Huawei equipment and to assess the risk posed by Huawei
I don't
to
imagine
5G
that work
infrastructures.
has stopped, though. That work hasn't stopped.
Yeah, so probably maybe it's still ongoing. Yeah, that's a question. Now, what is the most interesting side of this story, in my opinion, is exactly how they found out these names, if they're even real, of course. Because typically you'd expect these people to have like top OPSEC, like maybe the best in the world. So to reach from doing some cyber operations to get to a name, that's like very, very
Very
unlikely to
Volt
happen.
Typhoonish, eh?
So yeah, that was like the direction I was thinking. Could this be related to the Salt Typhoon attacks, to hacking into the ISPs, listening to people's phone? It would be much easier, in my humble opinion, to intercept or to capture a report which says, like, these guys here are working on this project and these are their names, and from there, like, okay, these are the guys. There's no OPSEC failure, there's no back attribution or even like back hacking of
Right.
operational boxes or orbs. It's more, in my opinion, likely that this is related to some Salt Typhoon op and the leak of classified report about operations against Harbin Asian Winter Games
Right.
and or Huawei.
You have to
I
imagine
mean,
they're
that's what
putting
I
a
meant.
mesh. Sorry, Juan. Go, go, go.
No, I was just saying, like, that's what I meant about the all source thing, right? And all source also includes OSINT. Like, remember back in the Nitro, like when the 0 Days documentary came out, the one that like ripped off Kim Zetter's book with no acknowledgement whatsoever. Still a good documentary. Um,
Because they ripped off
they
the book.
they ripped off the
It's a
book. You got
compliment
to
to
call it
Kim,
the way
man.
it is. But dude, like that documentary mentioned Nitro Zeus as like the larger operation around Olympic Games. And what was interesting at the time is once we had that name, you go into LinkedIn and there were all these assholes who've been like just fucking claiming Nitro Zeus as part of the ops they worked on because now they're looking for real jobs, right? Or like they've gone into the private
Hmm.
sector. And that has kind of changed a little bit, but not too much. And it's a very difficult thing in the US because like you have all these weird constraints around like how much can you tell people not to do X, Y, or Z. But this time around, I don't know that you have as much ease. I'm guessing some of that stuff has kind of changed a little bit, right? But
Ooh.
it,
Let's
it, it makes you
Google.
wonder.
Let's
I
go.
was gonna say it makes you
Let's
wonder to
Google
what extent
Turbo
some of this is
Panda.
just
That's the code
yeah.
name, Turbo Panda. There you go.
So
You
what?
need to Google
Just
that.
throw it into deep research now. Oh, 3 is out, guys.
I was going to
But
ask you how much of like this attribution information you think is just being dumped into LLMs and AI to just kind of sort through and help pinpoint who did what and who's connected to what. Data from Salt and Volt and all the other reporting gets mishmashed into AI to
are
do
you
this stuff.
asking on the part of the Chinese or in
Chinese
On the
side?
general?
part,
Right.
yes, on the part of the folks who doing this kind of doxing or
I
interested
mean,
in,
look,
in pinpointing these people.
they'd be foolish not to be using it. They would be completely foolish not to be using it. The question, I think, for everybody is the same, right? To what extent can you use this fruitfully and reliably? And we're getting to a point where, I mean, we have been for at least like 4 months or so since deep research dropped with OAI. We have been at a point where it is genuinely useful for research to a certain level. So do they have access to it? I would be surprised if they don't, right? Like
They have their
Kostin and I
own.
even, well, they have their own. The question is to what extent is it integrated? To what extent is it being, is it functioning well? I suspect the Chinese are going to have an easier time than we do because my assumption is that their classification system is not as fucking insane as ours is and unforgiving. Like Kostin and I saw a talk at Black Hat Asia from some, 360 researchers who were using different, they were talking about how they were using different models to classify and enrich um, IOCs, and they were using this like RAG over retrieval augmented generation over knowledge graph, which is really interesting, right? KG RAG. Like there's all these different, but so right now the question is more technical. Like to what extent can you make it genuinely useful? And we have a bigger problem with the stuff we work on because actually it's the same reason that Recorded Futures product never really worked very well. Like you created something that's meant to handle unstructured data and unstructured language and process it and create structure out of it. But in cyber, like when you pivot to cyber, most of our stuff is structured data. it doesn't, like, when an LLM reads an IP, it gains nothing from it. It's just a designator. So like you need to add enrichments, you need to codify relationships, you need to put things in a way that structure sort of shines through and manifests in some way. When you talk about investigations like this, I'm actually reminded of there was an interesting incident halfway through this, like the Israeli-Hamas war, where the head of 8200, which is usually, my understanding is the director of 8200 is kept secret, kind of doxed himself because he ended up releasing a book under a very poorly hidden pseudonym. I believe the book was called something like The Human Machine Team, and something like kind of kitschy, by this Brigadier General YS, which we now know as Yossi something, right? It was like the head of 8200. Anyways, the interesting thing about the book is that it details the struggle of an organization that works with closed source systems, so classified data, in having to integrate AI into their processes. Because if you think about it, right, like they were having most intelligence agencies have been having a hard time integrating OSINT, just open source stuff, because you're working on all these closed source systems. You don't want your selectors and stuff to make it out into the world. Anyone who's worked at Google or any of the search giants know just how much exhaust you can collect, like how much you can understand an organization, no matter how private, just on the basis of what they're looking for. So how do you add an LLM system, which has to be kind of this massive trained, ideally connected thing, and put it into a pipeline of like closed source data to open source data to closed source data to distribution? So like I'm fascinated by the problem of what you're describing, and maybe I'm taking away from the sexiness of like how is this being done, but they have to be using it.
You're going down your AI lane, your AI excitement lane, and taking away from the sexiness of the podcast. I want to connect that. I want to connect that doxing story of the three names, University of California, Virginia Tech, this output and this deliberate thing that Costin mentioned, pushing it on Facebook, to a very bizarre story in the Wall Street Journal, an exclusive report on China admitting to the Volt Typhoon hacks in secret meetings. That sounds bizarro to me. China spent the last 6 months, 8 months, years saying, hey, this is a U.S. operation doing all kinds of Twitter things. We talked about it. We even played the video. You remember we played the video on this podcast with them doing this misdirection. Are we to believe that they're admitting this in some secret meeting? What's going on in this meeting? Like, help me understand what I'm reading. And do you think these two things are tied at all?
By the way, before you jump into that, let's be precise here and say that the Chinese officials tacitly admitted. So
what does that mean?
Yeah, like they didn't deny it. In a way, they didn't deny it, but like saying that they admitted, in my opinion, is a bit too much because they.
Is it like the famous? I hacked you, you hacked me. Come on.
No spook would ever admit to hacking anyone. So. This
Unless
is like
they
what
were
makes
trying
the
to make
story
a point of it, right?
Correct. It could be signaling. It could be like deliberate signaling
but
in
then
negotiations.
It would be hush hush. Like maybe we did, maybe we didn't. Like what does it mean for you if we did? Something like that.
Tell me, Juanito, what's happening here?
That's what tacitly says, though. Like I do think there's some sneakiness in all of this, in them like tacitly could very well be, them saying, well, based on the information, that we got from similar operations, right? Like, or what, like saying something down the line, and then you guys go, wait, but that admits whatever. Like, to me, there's almost like I'm curious to I'm really curious why we're hearing this.
Yes, there's always a reason for this very specific particular Wall Street Journal front page leak.
But dude, like, it's a 2-paragraph story, and it felt like it happened like somebody walked out of the meeting to like text a reporter and went back into the meeting. You know what I mean? Like it feels it's unsubstantiated. There's no other commentary. There's no official response. It almost feels like someone just snuck one out. And I'm curious about that because it makes me wonder to what extent the Chinese have been admitting and having normal diplomatic discussions around these things in private this whole time. But like the more cautious operators, like maybe overly cautious operators from previous politically savvy administrations might have chosen to just not say anything, right? Because why would you? You're having a closed door conversation with your counterparts. you don't breach that trust and make the discussions worse by going out there and saying what these people said. That's one
Unless
thing. Well, but that's my point, right? Like, this means, like, in order for this to leak, it was somebody in the room. I don't think the Chinese did it, right? Like, so it gets into a point of, like, to what extent are we trying to frame sort of what they're doing in this kind of more nefarious way? And the Volt Typhoon thing is particularly interesting because, as we've said before on this podcast, right, the whole point of it was, like, it's some kind of wartime. It's being presented as wartime prepositioning.
prepositioning, right?
And
That was the word.
but that's necessary. There is no cyber quote unquote war. There are no offensive cyber operations without prepositioning, right? Like, you don't wait until somebody tells you who your target is because they need that shit done today, right now, ASAP. The planes are about to fly out. That's not when you go looking for access into these people's, like, radar systems, right? Like, that's not when you go, oh, okay, yeah, give me a second, I'm about to go profile what endpoints they have and what's exposed to the internet. That's not how that shit works at all. So there is a way in which we're not giving the Chinese grace, if that's appropriate, in saying they were doing the kind of prepositioning I am sure we have done. Right? Like, we have to have done it. We know it's been done in Russia. We know it's been done in other places because that's the way this shit works. You have to be hiding inside of that network. And to be fair, we've pointed out that the Russians have been doing this shit in U.S. mainland to, like, power stations with, like, Berserk Bear and
For
some of these other
years.
folks for years, because that's just the name of the game. So, like, the freak out about Volt Typhoon and Guam, it kind of felt like we just wanted to suddenly draw a line and say, hey, this is not cool. And you're like, but why? Right? Like, you used to complain about Chinese espionage because it was financially motivated and kind of, like, messing with this, like, larger economic game. But why are you denying them doing what you do as part of war preparation the same way we do it, they do it, and everybody else does it? Like, I'm not saying it's cool, but, like, they are
It's fair
doing
game,
what
basically, at
it's
this
what
level.
I'm saying. Like, it's the game where they put it in and then you clean it up and then they put it back and then you modify it so it doesn't work and, like, stuff like that. Like, that's just what that game is. Why would you dox that? It's like, it's a little strange.
Costin, do you see any connection at all to China being outed as doing this admission and following up with naming 3 NSA people and Winter Games 2 or 3 days later? Is this all negotiation
me-
posturing? What is
To
happening?
me, they feel they are very well connected to each other in a way. And keep in mind what I was talking about, the winter games, and, like, this is, like, really important to them. I think the message is pretty clear that the US complaining about China in Guam is like, yeah, this is unacceptable. And now China is saying pretty much the same. You guys hitting our Olympic Games where the president is heading over the opening, this is just as unacceptable to your complaints about our doings in Guam with Volt Typhoon. So yeah, I think the two stories are somehow intrinsically connected to each other. And I think that the first story triggered the release of the second story
Interesting.
and the push.
Interesting times. Interesting times. Is this at all linked to tariffs and economic negotiations? Do you think? I mean, I'm just trying to, like, make all my brain tingles go.
I have no clue. I don't think anything. So the bizarreness of the situation that we're in right now, because essentially we have cleared the geopolitical board of everything that we've been doing for the past, like, 60 years or whatever. It is very hard to talk about, like, what exactly is connected to what. In this case, it's hard to consider that it isn't a leg in a many-legged table that it leads to kind of all the same things, which is, like, how do we redefine our relationship between the US and China, for better or worse? Like, this could literally, it could go either way. I am sure that it's a part of what's being discussed. I think Costin rightly pointed out that for the Chinese, this game is has dimensions that we do not understand or that we don't properly appreciate because we're so self-centered. Like how much of this is important messaging inside of China, right? Like how much of this stuff is being done for the sake of Chinese consumption as opposed to make a statement to us, right? Like we're very self-centered in that. But I think on the tariff side of the situation, right? Like
You have to
there
imagine
is
there's a
a
bunch of cyber activity supporting the tariff conversations, right? I mean,
in theory, like
do I
in the
not want to
sense
know
of
what your position is on these negotiations?
no, I think the point here is like there is a bunch of cyber activity in the sense that this is a critical intelligence is primarily a function of information asymmetry attempting to benefit political decision makers. This is a high time for political decision making, and I bet you there are people killing themselves trying to understand the mind of Xi and how Xi Jinping's administration is disseminating information, how they're discussing these things, what the private discussions are, what their thoughts are. That's the whole point of doing intelligence. And I bet you the Chinese are going ape shit collecting stuff from us right now as well, because this is a critical time for intelligence to be valuable. At the same time, like how much of this is 4D chess and how much of it is like us playing our hands kind of in a slightly bumbling way, how much of it is going to pay off and how much of it isn't, I don't know. Like I actually think that in this particular scenario, what's going to save us and save the world, hopefully, is a recognition of the U.S. Chinese symbiosis. There is no way that we just decouple from each other in a functional way that doesn't rock the entire world and possibly set civilization back 50 years, right? Like you cannot have offloaded entire portions of your economic and manufacturing machinery to another country and then wish that country ill. That's not going to go well for you. And similarly, the Chinese can't really be all in on the death of the United States when we are their biggest consumer. There is a symbiosis there. And I think I understand some of the jingoism. I understand some of like the, they're bleeding us dry. We're doing this to them, whatever. Like that's part of the lines.
It can't
But
be a zero-sum game is your argument. It's like
my point, yeah, there's no such thing, right? Even if you wanted to turn back the clock on globalization, right? Like what was the Twitter's had a wonderful time with all this stuff, right? But like the minute Bill Cletus in Ohio learns how to make GPUs, we are just going to be minting money, right? Like this shit is not going to work that way. It's not going to work that way anytime soon. So there has to be a way in which like this is brinksmanship for the sake of redefining a relationship we feel is not necessarily advantageous to us. But there is no world in which the Chinese truly seek to like firewall and decouple themselves from the United States or vice versa without all of us feeling a very painful, genuinely life-altering change in for the near-term future.
For our European correspondent, Mr. Costin, how is all of this stuff playing in your backyard? All this tariff talk, shake-up. I mean, the European Union and the European Commission is involved in it. Like, is it the number one item in your news there?
I would say it is in the news. I don't know if you guys really want to know how this is how this is playing out.
That's precisely why we need to hear it. This is why we need to hear it.
Yeah, right? That's the sad thing. I mean, Romania was one of the most pro-American countries in the world. Like everyone, like even my grandparents were waiting for the Americans to come and free us. After the Second World War. So then the communism, and again, everyone was hoping and dreaming for the Americans to come. And what I see nowadays is like a huge shift, like suddenly. And I think it really touched the nerve with the elections here and how people perceived that the U.S. was in a way kind of trying to tilt the balance in the favor of the pro-Russian candidate, Kalin Georgescu. So these things, together with the tariffs, together together with the fact that Romania, starting March 1st, was supposed to enter the visa waiver program, and Trump canceled that or postponed it. So like the whole visa waiver thing is on hold. Like the sentiment around here,
Has
around the people
shifted
that I see, has
significantly.
shifted 180 degrees, and people are like,
Is it
um,
generational? Do you find that young people are
um,
more likely to
yeah,
be in part of this
young
shift?
young people who are open to social media, young people who use X, Facebook, whatever, they're more aggressive, if you want. They're especially, you can see this if you just go to X and check out the Romania U.S. Embassy in Romania's account and check all the comments posted there, like such like really bad comments, in my opinion, from random Romanian people, which in a way kind of summarizes the shift in opinion here. And definitely people don't like the tariffs. I think the leaders of the European unions, they kind of see that how this whole tariff game is a reactionary game. So in my opinion, they don't know how to play. They have absolutely no clue how to deal with Trump. They don't know how to play this negotiation game. So they see tariffs like, what is it, 80? We'll do 80, which in my opinion, like, and to make an analogy from chess, you like if your opponent plays e4, you play e5. They play knight f3, you play knight f6. So it's like just mirror the opponent, and this is like a sure path to destruction. And I think it was Bobby Fischer who played a brilliant game, a symmetrical game. Like his opponent was maybe more or less clueless, and he was just, I'm gonna play the same moves as you. And he absolutely crushes that guy in like 10 moves, because at some point he takes advantage of knowing the opponent's move. He's gonna move the same way that I do. That's a mistake. And I think the European leaders would probably be a lot smarter if they just didn't mirror all these tariffs and just start thinking a bit strategically and see what can be done about it.
Don't let them, I don't know, man, like don't let them get too smart. And I say that from the perspective of sort of the American side of the house. Like there is something completely bizarre to how the Europeans have been handling this whole situation. I think it's been visible since the Munich Security Forum, where like friends who came back from the Munich Security Forum were genuinely baffled at how surprised the Europeans were acting. And like more to say, right? Like, yeah, we flipped the table. Shit has changed, right? JD Vance showed up to the Munich Security Forum, and like people were fucking aghast at what he was saying. But
Because they weren't
none of it
listening
was.
for the last 3 years.
But none of it was new. Like that's
Yeah.
the point. Like people were like, "Yo, like I get that you don't like the message, but you should have come prepared." Like the idea that like you waited until somebody came to personally deliver the same message to you that they've been saying everywhere this whole time is kind of bizarre. But look, there's a way in which this can work out for the US, and there's a way in which this could go really poorly for the US. And what may, at the end of the day, save us is European virtue signaling, which the Europeans are so fond of. But which is to say, this may work out for the US if the Europeans get a clue that they can, like, just essentially do a deal, right? Like with this administration, right? Hand them some wins, talk about some trade victories. Yeah, we're going to spend more money in NATO. Yeah, we're going to spend more on whatever, this, that, and the other. And like, and they get what they need anyways, but they do it in a way that makes this administration look good, right? Like, look, that's just the way this shit works. Fucking, you want to play it or not play it? Like, you know, just whatever. But like, that's just the way this shit works. The way in which it works out really poorly for the US, and probably everybody involved, is if the rest of the countries, more so non-European nations, decide that they've been wanting to play with China this whole time. The US has been making it hard because, you know, it's you're either with us or you're with them. And all of a sudden we gave them an excuse to get to be with the more aligned with the Chinese, right? Like, yeah, we're just going to go get Huawei equipment. We are just going to get on Huawei cloud. We are just going to go buy a bunch of cheap, you know, Timu style shit and not trade with the US. And then you get into a situation, like, I think it's why you're seeing so much pressure from folks to be like, yo, fine, like the tariffs, maybe you have a good plan, but like fix this quickly. because you don't want people to feel the pain in other places and go, you know what? There's another way to solve this problem, and turn towards your enemy, right? So it's a fairly complicated game. I don't know how this is going to play out, right? Like, it's global trade was not simple when the machinery was running. If you suddenly pump the emergency, like you pull the emergency brake, it makes even less sense.
Let's switch back to cybersecurity for a minute before we lead the audience astray. Just yesterday, we got iOS 18.4.1, new version of macOS as well, that patches 2 0-day vulnerabilities marked as already exploited in the wild. One found by Google Tag, which is processing an audio stream in a maliciously crafted media file, result in code execution. And then another interesting one is an arbitrary read and write bypass of point-to authentication, RPAC, which is mitigation on, I believe, some ARM architectures, right, Costin?
Yeah, these are like two super interesting bugs, in my opinion. Even if we don't have like enough details, there's, let's say, sufficient details to grasp what was happening here. So first of all, like the core audio one, in a way, processing an audio stream in a malicious crafted media file may result in code execution. This is the kind of vulnerability that you can do through like a one-click exploitation. So either man on the middle, man on the side. If you just embed some kind of media in a web page that just plays in the browser, that kind of triggers the bug. I guess there may be even a case when this somehow gets automatically pre-parsed or pre-executed through an iMessage, although I think there's a higher chance that this was exploited through some one-click vulnerability attack chain. Now, the one that was more interesting to me was this RPAC thingy, this second vulnerability, CVE 2025. By the way, we still have CVE numbers, which is
For
another
now.
story this week.
For now.
And we'll get there. And this second vulnerability I thought was interesting, and it shows that all these modern mitigations that Apple has been pushing into their hardware. So this has been available on the ARM architecture since iPhone XS. So that's XS, 11, 12, and so on. They all benefit from this thing. And it kind of, in a way, it shows that, in my opinion, these hardware protections and these mitigations, they do really make the attackers' lives harder. So these guys, they had to implement this bypass as well, in addition to that original vulnerability. So making the whole thing more complicated, more expensive to the attackers, means the cost of the zero-day chain is also higher. It means that the customers need to pay more money, which means for a fixed budget, the customers can hit less targets. So in the end, we win. To me, this is a success story. I'm happy to see it, and I would be very curious to hear any kind of opposing thoughts. But to me, this is a kind of success story.
Let me read the wording from Apple here, because it's a running theme. Is Apple is aware of a report that this issue may have been exploited in an extremely sophisticated attack against specific targeted individuals on iOS. That's an actual language from the Apple press release. A bit of a mouthful, but they're signaling to us that this is one of those surveillance platforms, Juanito.
I guess. Like, I'm sitting here kind of looking at this whole situation, and it's like, first of all, like, my snarky shit in all of this is that I wanted to just joke and be like, yo, like, is Apple paying Google Project Zero, or like Google for maintaining Project Zero yet? Like, all Apple, like, how many Apple O days come from Bill Marzak, and how many of them come from Project Zero, and then how many of them come from Apple, right? Like, none.
Right. They credited themselves with the first one alongside Tag, and then the second, the RPAC one, they credited themselves, just Apple.
Right.
So it means that they must have done some spin-off research and figured out that they did this bypass.
Yeah. I mean, I have no clue. I mean, I think it's sort of like the usual thing that you get with these things, where it's always going to be some kind of like complex parser for some kind of media or some kind of, arbitrary amount of information encoded in some way, which always fucks us. And what like I get it and I appreciate the work. I also am a little bit scared um, because the more they do this sort of thing and the more you see that, like, the more functionality they're removing from lockdown mode. So like on some level I'm like, okay, well, now no audio, we're not going to get, we already don't get contact cards, I don't get business text messages, like you're just kind of, I can't auto join Wi-Fi that's insecure, which is wonderful when you get on a fucking plane, for example, right? Like there's so many ways in which lockdown is massively inconvenient, and I look at this and I go, thank you for securing us, but also like right, like
Yeah, but that
Um,
that triggers back to Costin's conversation. Let me challenge you for a second on that
yeah.
whole pointer authentication on our pack is a significant roadblock to these things. It has never stopped any of these guys. We went through these mitigations year after year. We raised the bar, ASLR, sandboxing, this, that. None of these attacks have ever stopped. You're saying, yes, it has slowed it down, it's made it more expensive, and so on. I'm saying if I'm at the level that we're talking about here, if the adversary wants to hit that target, nothing is stopping him really technologically. They're just kind
That's
of
not
putting up these roadblocks and we're just kind of relying on them going a little slower.
That's not necessarily true, right? Like we saw, sorry, and I'll let Kostin speak more authoritatively, but like I would just point out, we recently had an example of an O-Day where we were explicitly told, hey, if you were on lockdown mode, this shit didn't work.
Right,
Right.
because the target wasn't on lockdown mode and they didn't need it to work. The point is, if they needed it to work, they would have bypassed lockdown mode. Like, that's the argument I'm making. It's
But
like,
I don't know, dude, I don't know that it's that easy, right? Like talking to people who've developed recent-ish iPhone O-Day chains, like they're hard. They're super hard.
They're
Kostin
not
said
stopping though. There's no stop to
Yeah,
the
but
constant flow. Every freaking podcast, we have a new Apple O-Day. By the
I
way, there's a new one.
know.
There are two documented Android O-Days that marked as exploited
Right.
in the wild in Google's last Android Big Bulletin. And they're both USB subcomponents, and they're both under limited targeted exploitation. So as hard as it is and impossible as it is, the flow hasn't slowed whatsoever.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I stopped Kostin from speaking. Kostin, give us some actual insight in here. None of my bullshit.
authoritative opinion.
Exactly. Thank you.
Well, what I would say here is that typically these tool sets that people buy, I mean that rich people out there, rich nations buy, they come with, let's say, fixed set of targets you can hit. So it says like for $10 million you can infect 10 phones, and any additional 10 phones will cost you another $1 million. So if you have, let's say, a budget of $25 million, you'll be able to hit a very limited number of phones, like with some kind of a base price, maybe 20 phones.
Is that a policy pricing thing, or is that a technological barrier?
That is a kind of a market. It's a marketing thing, in my opinion, because I mean, if you have the 0-day, you can run it like 1,000 times. But at the same time, the more times you use a 0-day, the higher the chance that Bill Marcha will catch it, and they'll burn it, and it essentially kills your business, or it makes it like less profitable, because then you need to invest again in R&D and do another one. So to me, all these mitigations that make it harder for companies to create the chains, it means you up the costs, and it means that the packages, they will go up in price as well. So that means less nations will be able to afford them. I think there was even a story this week about this NSO lawsuit and the WhatsApp notifications, in which they actually named 3 countries they were responsible for this wave of exploitation. The countries were Mexico, Saudi Arabia, and Uzbekistan, on top of my head. So again, that means that there won't be pretty much every country in the world able to afford these things. The number will be smaller, so that means also the number of targets will be smaller. And in this probability game, the chance for someone to hit Conspiracy Ryan and the patriotic Juan and the poor me in Romania, it's lower. And I'm happy with these chances. Like blackjack, it means you have a higher chance to win, and whatever
you're just
that's
running faster
small,
than the guy.
that
the
chance
guy
is, I'm gonna take the chance. And hopefully, yeah, that means that we won't get hit. But I'm super confident that one of these days I'm gonna get the notification from Apple that I've been targeted with something by someone. Sometimes, no other
I'm just
details. Good luck.
no, I
Just
don't.
enable lockdown mode, which was already enabled, by the way.
I'm just saying, especially
Talk to
around lockdown
someone.
mode, right? Every time some one of these things pop out,
Mm,
someone says, "Well, would lockdown mode have stopped it?" And in my brain, like, if lockdown mode would have stopped it, they would not.
mm,
It's a stupid
Now,
question.
I don't know. I think Ryan, like, look, man, like you got to remember that we can't think about this in binary terms because it isn't, right? Like let's be total, it's not secure or insecure. It has to be threat modeled and it has to be sort of nuanced precisely because, right, like think about what we're discussing right now. The iPhone is a secure enough platform that there is a whole swath of attackers for whom it is just a non-starter, right? Like
mm.
there's a whole sleuth, there's a whole like swath of people for whom attacking an iPhone is just a non-starter. A whole swath of like the nuanced threat actors, the hacktivists, even a lot of the ransomware crews. Like even though they have a lot of resources, attacking an iPhone is just not a viable strategy. And that includes a whole portion of APTs, of nation state threat actors, who will continue to do their ops. They're going to try to hit the cloud. They're going to try to hit accounts. They're going to hit your Android phones. They're going to hit a bunch of other shit. But the iPhone is like, guys, like we can't do it and we can't afford it. And that's where you get into the game of economics, right? Like to Costin's point, yes, you can hit it. You probably can hit a target with lockdown mode. But if I tell you, look, it's already costing you 4 million a year, 5 million a year to get 10 licenses or 50 licenses for iOS hits. And then if that target is in lockdown mode, that target alone is going to cost you 2 million or 3 million because we need an O-Day chain that works on lockdown and we're not going to burn that shit unless we have to. Then it's not that it's not possible. It is possible, but it's expensive as fuck and you have to make decisions about whether it's worth it.
Sounds
And
to me
that's
that
really
the
the
creation
question.
of lockdown mode is good for those guys' businesses. Like that's what
Sure.
that's what you're describing to
It
me is that
is.
Apple has created this bit of technology that has allowed them to jack up their pricing. It's like it's counter to what we're trying to
But
do.
it's not like it's vertically integrated, right? Like it's not like Apple created lockdown mode and Apple sells O-Days, right? Like
No,
it's
no, no. I'm
totally
not
different
saying that. I'm
players.
saying the side effect is to stop them, and it hasn't stopped them. It's gotten them richer.
I no, well, I don't know, man. Like
I don't know.
you're keeping it from being a broad market. I'm okay with it being 3 to 4 good vendors and it being like maybe 3 or 4 organizations in the world that can afford this and they really have to sit down and think it through if it's worthwhile. Because I think the problem that you get with all these like commercial espionage tooling is that you're enabling somebody who couldn't get there themselves and you're doing so in a way that doesn't require them to be too discriminate. Like back in the hacking team days, Finfisher days, all you had was like, oh, I only have 50 active licenses at a time. But with those 50 active licenses, I'm going to do whatever the fuck I want. So politicians, opposition groups, hacktivists, like activists, like all that kind of shit, that doesn't matter. And like if I get burned, it was hacking team or Finn Fisher's responsibility to figure out how to give me another O-Day that was going to make this shit work. And it didn't super matter because hacking team could come back with, oh yeah, we used to give you a Word 0-day, now we give you an Office, like an Excel 0-day, but it's going to load the malware one way or the other. You don't have that freedom with iOS. There aren't different types of cardinality there. You either hit the thing with the super expensive tool or the super expensive exploit and then try to live there. And if the exploit gets burned, like I don't know how many we actually have sitting on the shelf because the tech is so good. And you're making it more expensive. Like that is a more valid approach. Absolutely. And that in that way you can look at Ivan's choice of like focusing on the security engineering to try to limit the way this works as the more the more long-term viable strategy for an organization like Apple that's unique in having like control of the hardware, the software, and the accounts and the cloud part and everything at the same time. You still get into the same issue that I've got, like that we've talked about 7,000 times, which is about verification. Like the problem that you have is I'm on lockdown mode, you're on lockdown mode. Most cases, we know the O-days won't work. The samples, in theory, the malware won't get there. There are gonna be cases where they will. And my being on lockdown mode does not enable any greater mechanism for verification that lets me know. Like when I boot up my phone on lockdown mode, it isn't letting me know, hey, you passed every integrity check. We're in this state. Everything is cool. And it's not hitting me up going, hey, there was a weird crash. Don't know what to tell you, but like, you know, just so you're aware. Or it's not producing more verbose logs for me. It's not giving me, like, I'm telling Apple that I am in such a state of potential vulnerability that I take seriously enough that I'm willing to live with a very constrained device where half of the pictures don't show up when I surf the internet.
Keep going,
and like
that's the problem. The problem with
can't get any
lockdown mode, it
fucking
makes your fucking phone unusable.
Yeah. I mean, it sucks. In comparison to the other things, it sucks. So I'm telling you that I'm willing to live this constrained life because I feel that the threat is serious enough. Why aren't you helping me more? I'm not telling you to build a whole perfect UX that experience that like works for me, even though we're a small subset of the people. I'm telling you, give me more information, enable me to do more, enable my backups to give me more stuff, right? Do more on my behalf. Even if it was like an advanced protection program where they go, you enabled lockdown mode. Does that mean you want to, I don't know, pay Apple $5 to have a console with EDR that kind of like tells you when we do weird shit?
Stop
like,
just Costin, please tell him to stop.
It can be Apple's EDR. I don't give a fuck. I'm just saying, give me something,
Keep your fucking
man.
EDR away from my phone.
There you go.
Look,
well,
I just
you go get
to...
hacked all on your own, then, bro.
Like you stop it. Go ahead, Costin.
Here's one.
But I will blog about it.
Blog. One dimension, by the way, to the whole lockdown mode issue here, I think, is that all the people that I spoke to who got these notifications, nobody had lockdown mode enabled. Nobody. And everyone turned on lockdown mode after they got the notification. So
and then
there's
they
two
turned
things
it back
here.
off in a month.
Probably yes. Like that's, by the way, another shock for me was to see that people like turn it on and off like randomly all the time.
Yeah.
Me,
this is the only way to make your fucking phone usable. If you're running
turned
lockdown
it on.
mode.
That's not true. I turned this on like years ago, and I never turned it off. Whenever I had a problem, I found a workaround. So like whatever problem you have,
you probably got one with the blue FaceTime going.
Costin, did you buy the phone on the way out of Singapore? Like,
no, what the Xiaomi
we can now
Oppo?
switch to Chinese phones. It'll be
is that the new Chinese phone? Show me.
Bro, I am so fascinated by this thing, and I'm so mad because it's so locked down to their shitty, like terrifying ecosystem. But like this thing is insane. It's like, so you see that?
Unfolded, man, unfolded for us.
And like it's beautiful. It's as thick as my iPhone and like folded, and it like folds out into this whole screen. The ecosystem's nice. I'm about to get into Android, like unlocking, jailbreaking, bootloader hacking, just so that I can try to fix this thing from being like a Chinese spy in my house.
What's the price of it?
It was $1,500. And it came with like 2 cases and a super special charger and a battery pack. But dude, like it's the same thickness. It's the same thickness as my iPhone, and it folds out into an iPad.
Wow.
Like, you have to understand the level of manufacturing the Chinese are playing with, and like we're not in the same game, bro.
Good luck trying to figure out the CVEs on there, because I want to pivot to the drama around
no
the
CVEs, bro. There are no CVEs.
Drama?
Don't worry
drama?
about it.
MITRE CVE funding drama. Let me just kind of recap for the audience what happened over the last 2 or 3 days. I believe it was late Tuesday night? Yeah, Tuesday evening, MITRE drops a letter saying that funding will end the next day. April 15th, the contract with the U.S. government was expiring on April 16th, and they had no word. There was a lot of uncertainty about whether it would even be renewed, if the contract would be cut. Back up to a few months ago, MITRE already pre-announced and announced that they were going to do layoffs because of expected budget cuts with the new government slashing funding. Everyone panics and assumes there's no new CVE numbers, and then we hear overnight that there's a new CVE foundation appearing, and there'll be some vendor neutral kind of thing to save the CVE system. Turns out CISA announces late in the evening that the CVE program is invaluable to the cybersecurity community and it's a priority of CISA. Last night, we executed the option period on the contract to ensure there would be no lapse in critical CVE services. The contract was extended. This option was for another 11 months, so there's still a lot of uncertainty around the long-term funding of this program. At the same time, we have like a bunch of like alternatives appearing overnight, some foundations with some mysterious people that we've never heard of. And Costin, your own ENISA, your Europeans are like, hey, we're going to have to do our own thing because apparently you rely on our CVE that we pay for with your freeloading selves over there. So that's a long, long way of saying, listen, the CVE program, which is deeply embedded into every part of our ecosystem, like we just described, all these vulnerabilities and so on, is actually funded by the U.S. government. It's a $29 million contract to MITRE, which is a nonprofit that generates $2 billion in revenue. It's just like a whole complicated, chaotic mishmash of things. Are we worried about the long-term viability of the CVE program? We know the Chinese have already segmented their own. We saw Kristen Del Rosso's talk previously about how they manage their vulnerability databases and so on. The Europeans create their own. Are we going to see a fracturing of this ecosystem? What does the CVE ecosystem look like a year from now? It's a lot of questions there. There's a mouthful of like a bunch of things, but it's pretty important. So help me understand, Juanito, how you're thinking about this.
I like how you start with Juanito on this because, yeah, my take will be brutal. But let's start with Juanito.
Actually, let's take the brutal.
Let's go Costin first. No, let's go Costin first. Your Europeans are making their own.
Like my European mind cannot comprehend why you need to spend that much money for a website where you click a button and you get a number and then you can edit that and put some comments. Like this is like tens of millions of dollars. I can do that with ChatGPT running on PHP probably, and it will run for the next 20 years.
This is dangerous talk. Like it's not just a website that you click on. There's a lot of work that goes into managing and cataloging and enriching and trying to make sure all these connections are done. Maybe it's not $29 million worth of work, but to dismiss it as a website is
I mean, let's think from the point of how people use it. I mean, if you look at how people use CVEs, what do? They just post this CVE dashed some year and the number, like as a way of knowing what we're talking about, and then we rely on the vendor pages which refer to the same numbers for an explanation. Honestly, I think I only used just maybe a very, very few times the official website to look at the vulnerability. And in that case, there was no useful information whatsoever about that. Like all the useful information would be either in some vendor page or even better in a blog post from a competing vendor who just takes apart that whole thing in so big detail.
It's true. Nobody goes to CVE.org.
Marketing punishment. But like, if you ask me, I never found any useful information on the official website when it came to the details. I want to say like, YARA rules that catch things, that exploit that thingy, IOCs, whatever, you don't find them like on the official website.
So it's a crappy service, and you're saying the service itself is crappy and unreliable and not entirely
I'm just
useful.
saying that it's not like maybe in theory it's super useful. Like, of course, in theory, having all that infrastructure and ecosystem, it's wonderful. In practice, for those people like myself who are like very hands-on and very practical, all I need is the number, and then I'll Google it and I find the pages on the vendor's website or the competing vendors' marketing dissections with all the details.
Juanito, he's right though. It's very rare that you go to CVE.org to find the documentation on a vulnerability. And even when you go there, it's pretty lame.
Yeah, I think the question here is like, what is the value? Like genuinely, and I mean that more as like an ecosystem thing. And this is something that I would love to discuss with someone like Katie Masuris that actually knows what the fuck she's talking about, right? Because like, I think what I agree with Kostin that it's hard to look at it as $29 million worth of work when you just think about the numbers, the CVE thingies, and the website. I'm curious. You know, Ryan, you mentioned that there's a certain amount of QA, and that's true, right? Like being able to identify what are like unique, actual
Affected vendors,
vulnerable.
for instance, in some of
Well,
these reference code things,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like somebody has to
Who's
track that thing.
affected? Who's affected? What's actually a new vulnerability? What's an actual ODay and not just like re-reporting something that was packaged before? You know, there's a certain amount of tracking the process of like things getting patched and so on. What I'm curious about, so as not to throw this whole thing away whole cloth and say, oh, it's useless. It's just a bunch of fucking numbers. That's not true. But I'm curious. Kostin made a joke about sort of like the marketing pain. To what extent is the value that we're getting from them the pressure that is exerted by there being a U.S. government adjacent organization with a semblance of independence that is hounding these vendors saying, we got a report of a vuln. It looks like a real vuln. We're going to put a number on it. It's coming out today. It's coming out in a week. It's coming out in 3 months. And like that process of the back and forth. I wonder to what extent that was happening, was a factor, was valuable for us even getting these numbers in the first place, right? Because the real issue you have, like we talked about, you know, the Chinese and their CVEs and whatever. It's like, yeah, but do they have any incentive to report any of those things to us in the first place beyond their own use of these tools, right? In the US, we're not seeing such a responsible tech sector, such a well self-regulated tech sector that like, oh, we don't need this. All these companies are so honest and so invested in security that they're doing this work by
They
themselves. Like
all
this is
signed
an
the pledge.
unnecessary thing, right? Right. Like the pledge doesn't exist, bro. That shit is turned into smoke. Like it's gone. It's dead to us. It's from the
webpage
before
I
time.
check every day. The CISA webpage still has the pledge, bro.
The before
So the
time.
pledge
The
lives.
CISA webpage, they're waiting for the domain registration to expire on it, and then it's like gonna disappear.
I think the point you're making though is that without a let's call it a non-profit controlled CVE ecosystem, it lands in the hands of these big vendors. And we know that they just sign pledges, and there's a risk of them controlling this kind of vulnerability marking and tagging ecosystem. And that's what I worry about with the creation of these new foundations, because there were no names attached to it. There was one name. The guy worked at Trellis, and I think he's listed in LinkedIn as working at a startup, but he's been on the CVE board. And these old CVE board folks are all kind of coming together and figuring out if they can raise some funding independently so they won't be relying on U.S. government funding when Doge comes in and there's all this uncertainty and so on. So there's an element of like, that makes a lot of sense. The problem is if you take it out of MITRE's hands and lands it in the hands of these big vendors, we know exactly what happens. I mean, the history of vendors taking security seriously is rife with stories over the years, right?
I think the issue that you have here is one where, look, right now, I don't think this is pointed, right? Like, it's not like the Trump administration or anybody decided they don't want CVE numbers anymore. They're cutting other funding, and that's having some impacts downstream. And there is an indication that MITRE might have gamed this whole process to make everybody panic and get the rest of their contract, which I don't necessarily blame them under the circumstances right now. But the real issue that you get is if this were an actual policy change where you're saying we don't want, like, if this weren't just a byproduct, but let's say that somebody actually said, look, we don't think that the best way to ensure security is for the government or some government funded project to be hounding these organizations and wasting government money, right, quote unquote. Then that's okay, right? But you have to follow it with a second act, which says, and, right, like the real issue here was we were letting these companies get away with so much. How about here's a ruling or a disposition or an EO or whatever the fuck that suddenly enables software liability. if you own the intellectual property of a code base and it's not open source, then you are responsible for the outcomes of what happens downstream because of the vulnerabilities and the problems with your software. And then you flip the whole fucking table. They're going to take the CVE numbers way more seriously than MITRE could ever get them to do it. The minute that, you know, Delta or whomever can come by and say, well, you fucked us. We got hit downstream because of this thing that's in your product. So here's a fucking $50 million lawsuit or a $500 million lawsuit because of whatever. I'm not saying that it's going to happen. I'm saying that if you wanted to look at this as a coordinated, intentional thing, that's what you've got to do. You have to, it's not having CVE numbers or not having CVE numbers. It's how do you create the conditions for security to be addressed by the regents that own these code bases instead of by somebody trying to like Chinese water torture these folks with like, oh, here's a CVE drop, here's a CVE drip, here's a CVE like bad publicity, here's marketing pain, right? Like
marketing punishment.
Marketing punishment.
What does it say about the state of vulnerability management though, when CVE ecosystem is like in a whole random state of uncertainty around funding? The National Vulnerability Database, the NVD, is way backlog on enriching this thing, and this is what people are relying on for your threat intelligence feeds and so on. It just, everything is just in a mucky state of like disrepair.
Because people want it to be, because there is, again, I focus on the incentives almost exclusively because I don't understand, like, if you don't make people want to do the thing that you need them to do, then everything else is bluster, right? Like, and what we've been trying to do, the reason this podcast used to bitch infinitely about CISA was that you were never creating the right incentives for people to do what you actually needed them to do. And we were, it's funny that now we're talking about like, oh, now we're in a like anti-regulation type government and what's going to happen. And we're like, yeah, but the last however many administrations were too scared to regulate the tech sector anyways, right? Like that's the funny thing about it. I'm not saying that this is better. I'm just saying like it's not like CISA came out with a carrot and a stick. CISA didn't say, hey, come sign this pledge. It's going to be great. You're going to get some great publicity. But if you fuck this up, we're going to come just gut your company, right? Like there was no independent evaluation. There were no, you know, the few reports we got from the CSRB were wonderful, but those were very few and very far between. So I'm
very
not
perfunctory.
trying for...
It had no stick attached to it.
That's the same thing with the CVE, like the CVE like vulnerability database. All the great benefit you're getting is a certain amount of public pressure about having an official designation that there is a vulnerability that has been acknowledged and is out in the wild and so on and so forth. But it isn't really amazing pressure on the vendor. And there are CVEs that get pointed out and people go, yep, there's a vulnerability, and they walk on and they don't give a flying fuck. Like, so clearly it's not like we had solved this problem and we're rolling it back. It's not like Microsoft having fixed rootkits and suddenly decided that they were going to fuck their own code signature, like code signing mechanism and reintroduce rootkits just for the fun of it, right?
Speaking of the government and uncertainty, we got news last night. Juanito, I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit. Chris Krebs announcing his exit from SentinelOne after an executive order from U.S. White House executive order that ordered the removal of any active clearances he had, and an investigation that kind of roped SentinelOne into it. So I want to ask you, first of all, you worried about your clearance, buddy? And I don't expect you to speak for SentinelOne on the pod, but is there anything you can flesh out for us?
This motherfucker, I was so close to just wrapping this shit up.
Was that the pipe? Did I just see a pipe?
Of course.
Can you
for
show
my clearance.
it?
No, show him.
For my clearance.
Was it like an electronic pipe?
All right.
With the green light?
So let's talk about this. And frankly, like I was a little pissed at the two of you for canceling the recording last week because I knew people were gonna think I was bitching out from like I've been dishing shit out for all these companies for years now, and like you know, when it comes home, it's a much more kind of complicated situation. But I
The
don't want
podcast was
to
delayed with the like
Delay.
legitimate travel thing. Juanito, I'll take you off the.
motherfuckers not traveling with your microphones.
This had to take you off guard though. They just the
No.
executive order right off the top. No.
No. I like look. It definitely was not like we knew it was coming, but
Right.
on some level, it wasn't entirely surprising. This has been getting signaled about CISA and you know folks going after CISA in sort of Congress and so on for a while. To me, it felt like an inevitability that was going to come along the lines of, you know, just Chris's previous work and how that's being perceived. I did not expect, again, not entirely surprising, but I was not expecting S1 to get named in the EO. And I didn't think it was going to be about clearances or not. But I'll tell you why I didn't think it was about clearances. Like, we don't really use clearances. Like, we have, when that statement went out where you're like, hey, we have less than 10 folks, like, we literally had to go looking and be like legal, and everybody's like, who the fuck has a clearance in here? Because in part, we're not sponsoring them ourselves, right? Like you don't have that process. So on the threat intel side of it, we have worked very hard to work without the poisoned fruit that is classified information. I can tell you, look, I'll be completely forthright. No one at Labs has a clearance. No one at Labs has ever had a clearance. We do all of our work. Like most of the shit that we were doing was for the benefit of these Western governments.
Can I ask a side question very quickly?
Getting stuff from them.
Can I ask a side question on this very issue very quickly? Like, sure. Chris Krebs left government service, what, 4 or 5 years ago? Fired by tweet, famously.
Right.
Why do these people who help me understand how DC works, that he would have an active clearance 5 years later? Does he need to interface with government organizations in the course of his policy work? Is that a normal thing that people just retain these clearances forever? Help me understand how that works.
So it's a relatively normal thing for like high profile folks to retain their clearances so that they can go back in the building and help advise and like be part of conversations that are sort of like high level.
It's a critical important thing for people to have in Washington D.C. because I feel like guys I know wouldn't even walk by a weed store because of clearance, right? Like
but I think that in the U.S. we do such a good job indoctrinating this sort of like Mormon adjacent mentality in the IC and law enforcement about like the horrors of like drugs and all this stuff that people leave their clearances behind. They're still scared. Right? Like you've basically told this person you're going to go to jail if you so much as say the wrong word in the wrong context, in the wrong room, and you tell them that for 20 years. And right, it just like cements it, right?
But when the executive order removes it, it means that that's a very, very big, important thing to the folks who it's being removed from.
I'm not going to say whether it's a value or not. Whether that like it's impactful or not for those individuals, right? What impact it has on certain people, I think it's the stigma that some people can associate with it. I can tell you that from a logistical standpoint, like doesn't affect our FedRAMP, doesn't affect our work, doesn't affect our research, doesn't even affect our collaboration. At the same time, I think it's not like I'm just brushing it off. I think Chris is going to do what he thinks is the right thing to do in handling the situation, and like Godspeed to him. Like the man's got, he's got the balls to like really take on this Goliath and do what he feels is appropriate. From the S1 standpoint, you work a clearance is something that you maintain and get and handle, not because it's a fucking like exciting privilege. It's because it's a thing that is required or isn't required by your government customers. It's up to them to figure out whatever the government decides is going to be the process for vetting and relying and modifying and investigating those clearances. You abide by it, right? Like that's entirely their prerogative. At the same time, I can tell you straight up, it's something that you do on their behalf. If they don't want you to have it, then you don't have it. Materially, from a threat intel standpoint, from a whatever standpoint, it makes zero difference. If we hadn't read the EO, it wouldn't have changed anything from our day-to-day.
SentinelOne
just kind of get caught in the crossfire.
SentinelOne was caught in the crossfire because I believe this entire thing is just meant to make him unemployable, to punish him for. I mean, that's the whole point. I'm no surprise whatsoever that he resigned immediately. From outside looking in. I mean, it became untenable. It became quite obvious. Costin, you look very excited about this conversation. How do you view all of this stuff?
Costin's like asleep listening to this shit.
I was thinking. Well, first of all, most of these problems comes from the fact that we think about practical things in philosophic terms, and we think about philosophic things in too practical terms. So one example here would be the fact that
Costin at work.
I like this.
Recently, there's a new theory about the nature of the universe, which says that the reason why we don't make sense of the universe is that our math is wrong. So for instance, like take irrational or transcendental numbers, you don't really what is the 1,000,000th digit of pi unless you actually go all the way and compute it. Otherwise, you have no clue what that is. So that kind of transposes into the whole quantum nature of the universe, when a thing is impossible to predict unless you actually compute it. So I think this story is pretty much a kind of a reflection of this concept. Like, you really can't compute unless you essentially go ahead and see what happens and just do it in a way.
I think Costin's giving the answer people expected me to give. Costin is deflecting my problem, like, which I think is actually really sweet. Like, it's actually very kind.
I got some questions I could grill you on, Juanito, but I want to be respectful of the fact that... Listen.
My point is grill me because I do this to all these other people. And I
you're
don't think
Mr. Shit Talker on the show.
Dude, I shit talk every company here.
At the same time, you don't speak for SentinelOne. SentinelOne is a publicly traded company. Look, I don't expect you to speak for SentinelOne, and I just want to kind of like put that little bit of caveat so that the audience understands.
Look, I appreciate it, and like I said, I think I have a certain responsibility to stand up to whatever and just say things as bluntly as I say it. On some level, I'm an executive. I can't, right? Like you have to respect the company and not like throw them under the bus, which I think is what Chris is doing as well, right? Like you can't, how can he go about his business and
correct,
and anybody else go about their business with that noose hanging around their necks?
The other logical question then is, do you think that Alex Stamos gets dragged into this? Because he's got his Stanford Observatory misinformation research that was very, very, very aggressively looked down upon with
out of respect and love for Stamos,
I told you I was going to ask hard questions.
Yeah, but that one is like, I'm not gonna like, this dude is
it
not
wouldn't
in
surprise
the crosshairs.
any of us.
I'm not gonna throw him like, I'm not gonna throw a brick at him.
I'm not
right?
throwing
like,
him under the bus, but it wouldn't surprise any of us to see his name get dragged into some of this like deliberate attempts to.
But if you're gonna do that on the basis of like a university affiliation, for example, like, we're all fucked. Like that, I think that's the real nature of things here. It's like, there is no way that you can objectively say like we are not in any kind of hot water. Like, nobody is, right? Like, anybody who's doing any kind of interesting work in some capacity has to figure out sort of how they want to play ball. In this particular situation, look, the whole of the table has been flipped. The whole of the table has been flipped. People are getting fired from NSA. People are getting fired from all these different places. All the leadership has changed. I can tell you one thing I've appreciated about the situation that you mentioned, sort of with the Europeans waking up, right? Like, all of a sudden you have these European players who are desperate to talk, who before were unenthusiastic. They were like, oh yeah, maybe we'll see you around, and like, we were doing all this great collaborative work. And all of a sudden, and the Europeans weren't really playing ball. All of a sudden, they're awake and they want to talk. They're really eager to get involved. And it comes at a time when USG is receding. It's trying to figure out its own house. It's trying to figure out what's going to happen from this point forward. Clearance or no clearance, right? Like, we're part of all the collaboration centers. I think I'm the only like public partner NSA CCC has ever had, as far as I know. But I can tell you that those places have gone quiet. They've gone dead quiet, and you can't blame them because they're trying to figure out what's going to happen to them as well. right?
You
So
think it
at a
gets
time
figured out
when
though? You think we're in this churn and turmoil of it being figured out because of the Doge cuts and all this stuff happening? People are just kind of like in this holding pattern over a year. Like the RSA conference, for instance, announced that
Yeah.
the two NSA speakers, Morgan Adamski and another speaker, will no longer be there because all the credit cards have all the travel credit cards and travel cuts have been implemented across the board.
Yeah.
Everyone is affected. Right? Do you think
Yeah.
this is just like a holding pattern until they figure out what the funding and so on looks like?
I
Or is this
think-
par for the course?
Well, I think you have to beg and hope that it's a that it's a holding pattern, that it's a temporary thing. Because what's the alternative? We have no intelligence agencies, no cyber collaboration, no functional intel community. That's not going to work, right? Like, so obviously things are getting reshuffled, and you can't take entrenched bureaucracies and play a game of Jenga where you start sliding things in and out of the bottom and expect them to handle that change well. Is it a change for the better? Is it a change for the worse? I have no fucking clue. I hope it's for the better. Look, there are things, again, trying to find a good, like some good in all this. There are things in the American intelligence community that are irrational, broken, and unfixable. One of them being the classification problem. The whole conversation we've been having, starting from the very beginning of this podcast, right? Like, about, well, you're not going to get an all-source investigation in the U.S. Well, like, we're never really going to be able to use all the material that the U.S. collects in order to, like, dock some of these cyber operators, because it will never, ever be declassified. Those things, I mean, if you're willing to change everything else, can we also fix those problems? Right? Like, and that's not my way of saying, well, I'm not getting a clearance, so, like, please declassify everything. I never wanted a clearance in the fucking first place so that we could play this game. I don't want to have to sit around and go, is any of this coming as like fruit, like it's poisoned fruit, because it's forbidden knowledge. I want to find it all out for the same way that, like, our adversaries are going to find it all out and leverage that.
Let's leave it right there and close the show with some shout outs. Costin, you get to go first. Any shout outs this week?
Thank you. Well, to all my friends in Singapore, they know who they are. Thank you guys for making my birthday such an amazing thing.
Oh, wow.
I
missed out.
It was beautiful, and also, by the way, shout outs to Alex. He came to me at Black Hat. And said, like, by the way, you work with my father. And I was like, oh my God, I'm that old. And now the children of the people that I work to come to me and say, hey, you worked with my father. And Alex himself is now working in a company. So shout out to Alex for saying hi. By the way, shout out to Oleg, who is now, we used to work with him, and he's now doing like big things at TikTok, like preventing disinformation and things. And shout out, by the way, to my good friend Mr. Eugene, who works on blockchain technologies like high performance APIs. We randomly walked into each other in Singapore while having a coffee, and I was like, oh my God, I haven't seen you in like 15 years maybe. And I was super happy to hear that there's still people working with these blockchain technologies. And I just wanted to say one last thing that I didn't have the chance. I need to say this, which is I would love to see a Doge version of the CVE things implemented with blockchain. That should solve it.
Do you want Doge to just recreate the CVE list with like
blockchain?
two 19-year-olds, vibe coding like pipeline, and some blockchain?
Can't do shout outs from Singapore without a big shout out to Vitali-san and Oksana, my friends there who I miss very dearly. My friends there who I miss very dearly. They're one of the reasons I want to go back to Singapore. Let me do my quick shout outs first, and then I'll hand it to Juanito to close this show.
Sure.
One thing we didn't talk about at all this week is Microsoft shipped another O-Day for another patch for another in the wild exploited 0-day on Patch Tuesday. We got a blog post from Mystic with IOX and details that it was ransomware and so on. So shout out, maybe John Lambert is listening. I don't know.
Wait. There's no IOX. What are you talking about?
Yeah,
there's no
IOX.
Description.
There's
no IOX. No hashes.
Oi.
There's no hashes.
Oh, I take back my shout out.
Look at me. There's no hashes.
Maybe John Lambert is listening. Please add IOX or Costin next. But for me, just knowing that it was a ransomware actor and some descriptions and some stuff, I thought it was
That
I've
was
been
nice.
whining about this on the
Absolutely.
podcast for years. So we got something fresh on Patch Tuesday. Thank you guys. Shout out to the guys in Mystic who were holding down the fort there. Juanito, close the show for me quickly.
Well, I mean, so right on the same boat with Costin about, so the folks in Singapore, it was actually pretty amazing to actually meet some of the fans of the show, and that's one thing I'm not used to. Like, I think we've always gotten some rock star treatment, but it's different to get folks that like I've never seen before
In the
just coming
toilet?
up and like, well, yeah, actually somebody like cornered me leaving like the like trying to go to the bathroom and literally having to like stop and just talk to the folks. But like, it's much appreciated. It's actually really nice to talk to some people. On that front, one of our what are we at? 50 loyal listeners. Blake Gibson, guy working OT security, one of our customers, and apparently a big fan of the show. And similarly, I did want to take a minute to say happy birthday to Master Costin. I think we've kind of, not to get too sappy here, but just talking to some talking to some folks that have worked with Costin and that got to celebrate his birthday with him over there, and
did
sort
you guys
of
have speeches and shit without me?
Yeah, man. Like, yeah, if you'd fucking shown up to Singapore, you might have gotten some of this reminiscing. But no, look, you were there. You saw all of this.
I know.
Like, Costin, you've done a lot of great things for a lot of folks in the industry, a lot of people that worked with you. And I've always been more than proud and happy to call you a mentor. But I'll say, like, a lot of us would not be where we are without you. So, and all the work that you did with us and all the opportunities you've given us. So I'm particularly grateful, and I'll say happy birthday and many happy returns. And since we're already getting sappy, I'll say, look, I think Ryan was very forgiving, and I did not take much of a grilling on this one. I think it's only fair to discuss things about as openly as you can without like maligning or putting people in a bad place. But what I will say in response to everything we've seen, like, it is a time of uncertainty. There are a lot of people who are uncomfortable speaking or just, unhappy with what they're seeing, not knowing where things are going. And I can share some of that sentiment, but I do think we need to remember what the mission is here, right? Like, and this is something I'm workshopping, and you can call me sort of like, whatever you want for it. But to some extent, like, cybersecurity is an essential pillar of national security. It has to come back. It has to be worked on. We cannot take our hand off the wheel completely. We're in a time of chaos.
It has to be bipartisan too. I think that's the key thing. It is because these issues affect both sides. The fact that we are not there is startling.
Well, right now we might not see it too clearly. I really don't want us to get to a point where we are reminded of the importance of cybersecurity by some semi-catastrophic incident that we're unprepared to handle. Times of turmoil are precisely when you should be battening down the hatches and looking over your shoulder and looking at the foundations of what everything relies on, and making sure that you're not going to get blindsided and surprised. So let's not. I understand that folks are kind of concerned. They're uncomfortable. Uncertainty is an unpleasant thing, but just remember that there is an actual mission. That what we do, while we may feel futile, we may feel that we can't influence things the way we need to, that's not actually the reality of things. This is very necessary, and the stability that we enjoy in cyberspace comes from the people here who are listening to this, who are fighting day in and day out, who are not getting discouraged by what's going on, and like, we need you motherfuckers. So like, keep your head in the game.
Talk your talk.
Keep your head in the fucking game. And I will keep crucifying folks to the extent that's necessary, and shouting out and praising folks to the extent it's necessary. And I have to accept that that's going to come my way too. So, I appreciate you taking it easy on me to some extent, but it's just going to be par for the course, right?
Sounds good. Happy birthday, Costin. Well said.
Well
said and everything.
Thanks for the kind words. I mean, I would very much like to spend the next 30 minutes reciprocating everything that you said, and I'm learning like a lot of things from you guys nowadays. Actually, I think the learning curve has kind of reversed nowadays, so I'm learning like a lot more from you than you guys are from me. But thank you for all that. And I would like again spend more time, but there's another tooth that needs to go.
This man.
And this famous doctor who only goes to the clinic like once per month
Today is his
said that I need
Today is his
to see
day.
him today in 15 minutes from now
Go,
on.
Oh man, go. Next
but-
episode is 3-hour episode. That's
Next
how we're
episode
gonna
is 3 hours,
compensate
that's
for
one
this.
thing, and
3-hour episode next week.
We need to have a serious talk about the nature of the universe and
That's a
a
great
new
answer, by the way.
study which actually
I'm gonna clip out
says
that answer
the
specifically.
universe is actually spinning. That's a new study from the James Webb Telescope that the whole universe is actually rotating, spinning around itself.
These conversations are why Costin can't get a clearance either.
Thank you, guys. Have a great week.